my name is Jie Huang and I'm an immigration lawyer at Scott Legal PC. In this video today, I will talk about a question that I get very commonly from people who have had a US green card in the past and they had left the country for a couple of years after that, and then now they want to enter the US and live in the US as a green card holder once more. This is a question that I get. Someone had a green card many years ago and now they live in a different country. And at this point, they want to live in the US as a green card holder again. And if you look at the green card is still valid. It could either be that it has not expired yet, or it could be that the green card does not have an expiry date. Then the question goes, can I enter the US again with this green card and live in the US as a permanent resident again? A lot of people may be surprised by this answer, but in the circumstances that I just described, where somebody lived in the US as a green card holder for a couple years and then left the US and took up residence somewhere else, let's say in Canada or in South Korea or somewhere else, and lived in that country for many years at a time, in that case, it is very likely that that person, even if that person has a US green card that says that is valid on its face, it is very possible that this person's permanent resident status is no longer valid. And the reasoning behind this is actually quite simple. Permanent residents are, by definition, people who say that they will be living and working in the US on a permanent basis. And once you leave the US and take up permanent residence somewhere else, for example, in your home country or a different country even, such as Canada, you are basically telling the US that you don't need your permanent resident status anymore. And by doing that, you are relinquishing or abandoning, or just in simple terms, giving up your permanent resident status just by taking up your affairs and relocating to another country and staying in that country for more than a year with the intention to make that country your new permanent home. Let's say you obtained your permanent resident status, your US green card in 2015. And let's say you continued to live in the US and worked in the US, paid US taxes all the way until 2018, let's say. And then in 2018, you left the United States. You took up residence in Canada. You got a new job in Canada, you bought a house in Canada, and you started paying Canadian taxes only as a Canadian tax resident. In that case, in 2022, will you be able to take up your US permanent residence once more? And the answer to that in those circumstances, most likely no. In this scenario that I just described to you, because you have left the US and stayed in Canada for more than 1 year with the intention of living and working in Canada and making that your primary residence, let's say, in that scenario, it will be very likely that you would have already have given up your US permanent resident status, and you will not be able to go back to the US after these years and take up permanent residence as a US green card holder once more, even if you have a valid green card. What is important in thinking about these scenarios is the intent of making someplace your permanent place of residence. And those things are evidenced by having a house there, having a rental lease there, having family there, paying taxes, and having employment ties there. So there are many different factors that come into whether you would be seen by the immigration authorities as having kept your US permanent resident status or having relinquished or abandoned or gave up your permanent resident status. This is a very fact-intensive inquiry, so if you feel like your case is somewhere in the middle, you should definitely seek the advice of experienced counsel so that you know how to go forward and how to understand the status of your US green card. Losing or relinquishing your permanent resident status is unfortunately something that is not reversible. Therefore, in order to be a US permanent resident again, in this case, you will need to make a brand new application for US permanent residence. To avoid situations like this from happening, if you are a US green card holder and you anticipate having to leave the country for more than 1 year at a time, it is highly advised for you to apply and obtain a re-entry permit so that just the fact that you're gone for more than a year does not trigger the assumption that you intend to relinquish or give up your permanent resident status. A re-entry permit will give you permission to keep your permanent resident status, and you will likely be able to enter the US again as a permanent resident with your green card, even if you have lived outside the US for more than a year. It is important to note that you can only apply for the re-entry permit if you are still within the United States. So it is very important, if you are a US green card holder and if you anticipate having to leave the US for a prolonged period of time, for you to obtain a re-entry permit before you leave the United States. If you have already left the United States, the other option available to you is to apply for an SB1 returning resident visa. This application is likely to be successful if you can prove that your absence from the US is temporary in nature and that you have maintained sufficient connections to the United States and that the prolonged stay was due to factors beyond your control. In conclusion, it is very important that if you are a US green card holder, if you want to keep your status as a US permanent resident, it is very important to not leave the US without a re-entry permit and stay in a foreign country for more than 1 year at a time, because then it will trigger the assumption that you have relinquished, abandoned, or in easier words, given up your US permanent resident status. In that case, if you are deemed or if you are found to have abandoned your permanent resident status, in order to live in the US again as a permanent resident, you'll have to make a brand new application.